The sun hung high, but its light seemed to offer Danae no warmth. She was deep within a thicket of wild berry bushes, the air smelling faintly of sweet fruit and damp earth. She kept her eyes fixed on the task, picking the dark, plump berries into her worn basket. This monotonous work was a necessary ritual, a forced, meditative attempt to clear her mind of the sick dread that had become a permanent, corrosive fixture in her soul. She desperately craved solitude, a vacuum away from the suffocating presence of her older cousin, Preston. The very thought of him and of what he did to her under the cloak of night made her stomach clench with cold nausea. It was a vicious daily cycle of violation and silence that bred a deep, festering resentment. A year had passed since her father's death, a tragedy that uprooted her life and planted her in the care of her Aunt Ivy and Preston. When the grief first hit, Danae had foolishly harbored a secret, desperate hope that leaving her old life behind might somehow mean things would get better. Instead, she had only traded one hell for another, exchanging the known darkness for a private, predatory horror. Preston was 19, a daunting 3 years older than her own 15, and far, far stronger. Not as strong as Daddy, she would tell herself, a meaningless comparison to a dead protector, but strong enough to ensure she understood, with chilling clarity, that resistance was utterly futile. She had managed maybe 5 minutes of fragile peace, the only sound the quiet plop of berries hitting the basket bottom. Then the silence shattered. The dry, brittle snap of a twig ripped through the air, close and sudden. Danae jumped as if struck by an electric current, her muscles coiling tight with primal alarm. Dan, what are you doing?" The question was not one of innocent inquiry. It was a predatory claim, delivered in Preston's sickeningly sing-song voice as he swaggered into view, his shadow falling on her like a shroud. He moved instantly, attempting to flank her, his body language signaling that the casual hunting game had begun. Danae didn't hesitate. She dropped her basket, a clattering sacrifice to the earth, and practically dove into the dense bushes. She had zero curiosity about what he wanted. She knew the answer, and it always tasted like ash. Thorns and stiff branches immediately tore at her clothes and skin, leaving angry red scratches that stung and bled, but she drove onward, hoping the painful barrier would discourage Preston from following. Maybe, just maybe, the thought flashed, he wouldn't think I was worth the effort. She burst through the dense foliage and dashed into the forest, a blur of desperate motion. He must have known. He must have been certain she would seek out this specific spot to be alone, the berry thicket that lay miles from their isolated cabin and, crucially, out of earshot from any living soul. It was the perfect hunting ground. She heard the telltale furious cracking and thrashing as he violently pulled free from the bushes behind her. As she ran and stumbled through the chaotic maze of trees and undergrowth, the dreaded nights rushed back into her mind. A torrent of abuse she had grown simultaneously fed up and numb to. It was an endless, draining trauma. Her flight felt stupid, naive. She had sought safety out here, probably clinging to the ridiculous, childlike notion that her tormentors, like fictional vampires, slept during the day. Day was supposed to be safe. The raw panic churning in her gut was the brutal proof that she had been terribly wrong. The sun offered no protection at all. She was exposed, and the hunter was closing the distance. Last week she had gotten the courage to tell her Aunt Ivy, but her aunt flat-out refused to believe her. Preston, of course, denied any wrongdoing, and her aunt only thought the orphaned tramp was jealous of her perfect son. And with that, all options for help evaporated. There was no real authority to go to, not in the Appalachians anyway, not after the United States collapsed a few decades ago. There was a township about 10 miles down the road, but they had their own problems. No one would listen to Danae's sob story, especially not some nobody orphan. This, coupled with the fact that any man in charge would likely violate her. Orphan girls often became prostitutes to survive, and this was regarded as just the way things were. She longed to move out west, where they supposedly still had civilization akin to old America. They said the Mormons kept Utah chugging along like the collapse never happened, but to journey that far was a fantasy at best. Her heart pounded in her ears as she ran with no direction in mind. She only wanted away. After she accused Preston he had left her alone, but she knew he was angry for tattling on him. She eventually spotted an old rotting cabin through the trees and headed towards it. Up close, she saw the roof had collapsed in on itself many years ago. She ran up the brittle front steps and went inside the broken doorway to see if she could find a hiding spot. Nature had reclaimed the abandoned shack, with moss and vines everywhere. She took too long to find a place to hide and heard her cousin close in. She ran again and vaulted through a window on the far side of the cabin to escape. An old piece of glass on the window frame cut her left palm, which caused her to stumble to her knees when she landed. The wound burned, but she gritted her teeth, balled her hand in a fist, and kept running. She was exhausted, but didn't dare stop. There was a loud crash from the cabin, the snap of splintering wood, and an agonized scream. Danae slowed down before she turned back, expecting a trick. No one followed her out of the cabin. Instead, she heard muffled sobs of pain.
"Dan! Dan, I'm sorry!" Preston yelled at the top of his lungs. By the volume, she guessed he assumed she had gotten further than she had. "Dan, help!" he repeated. Danae warily walked back to the cabin, breathing heavily. Her left hand dripped, burned and dripped. She pressed it to her stomach, staining her oversized green button-up shirt. She crouch-walked to approach the cabin and slowly rose to peek inside the window. She made an involuntary gasp when she saw what had happened to Preston. Preston's right leg had gone through the brittle floor, and a large splinter had pierced his thigh. He was in an awkward position, leaned back with his left leg straight out and his other skewered and inside the floor. He was scratched up from following her through the bushes and looked miserable. He heard her gasp and looked up to see her. "Dan, you've got to get help! Go get Mom!" he pleaded. Danae walked around the structure to go through the broken front door again, careful of where she stepped. Although Preston was about 50 pounds heavier, she didn't want to risk falling through the floor herself. She got close to him, leaned over to look at the wound, but was sure to stay out of his reach. "You can't move," Danae said. This realization filled her eyes with tears. It was over. Even if he survived, he would still be left disabled. Relief twinged with guilt flooded her. "No shit," Preston said. "No, I mean, if you move, you'll probably bleed out. There's a big vein in your leg." Or, no, not vein. What was the other one? "You've got to get my mom. She can get the doctor." Danae stood up straight and began to search the dark nooks and crannies of the cabin. Something. Aorta? No, that's not right. Den mused to herself. She had the word on the tip of her tongue, but she couldn't think of what it was. She could read and write, but hadn't had a formal education. She picked up what she could from whatever books she could get her hands on. She last heard the word from the local mortician about a year ago. "Well, what the hell do you suggest?" Preston yelled. She could see he was scared. It gave her sick enjoyment. Danae found what she was looking for and used a nearby twig to pick it up out of its hiding place. "Me? Oh, I'm not going to be any help." She held the Black Widow up to her eyeline to watch the small creature crawl up its web towards the stick. "Danae? What is that?" Preston asked.
Danae rotated the twig as she crept towards Preston, careful to keep the little spider climbing ever upwards away from her hand. "I'm sorry for what I did to you. You've got to understand. You're so beautiful, and it's so lonely up here. I couldn't help it." Preston defended himself. She almost reconsidered, not out of sympathy towards him, but because she didn't want to be cruel. Many women were violated, but they didn't torture their attackers in return. "I love you, Dan, I love you," he said. On the other hand, this was probably mostly because those women never got the opportunity. His sincerity enraged her, and she tossed the stick with the spider onto him. He panicked and flailed around, which moved his leg around the splinter. He screamed in pain and confusion as blood pooled up from the splinter head. She didn't know if the spider had done anything until she saw the 2 small puncture marks on his right forearm. She didn't see where the spider had gone, but she figured, out of sight, out of mind. "God damn it, did it bite me?" Preston searched his exposed skin until he saw the 2 swelling pinpricks. "What was that?" Danae didn't answer. She cleared herself a space on the floor, sat down, and leaned her back against the wall. Her scrapes and cuts stung, and she was tired. "Dan, you really need to get help now. Quit fucking around," Preston commanded. She gave him a blank look, and he screamed at her. He became paler by the minute, and she could see him sweat. He pleaded, begged, bargained, and demanded her to do something until he was hoarse. When he was finally quiet, Danae spoke. "Preston, I hate you. They say that love and hate are 2 sides of the same coin or some nonsense, but I think I just hate you. You're going to die, and now I'm happy." An enticing, dark sickness bubbled inside her. She knew she wasn't supposed to enjoy this, to admit to herself she enjoyed the sadism. But it's what she felt. You can't control feelings. That's what Mama used to say, God rest her soul. What she should be doing, even now, was everything in her power to help. She should try to tourniquet the leg, get him water, or do anything. It was about a half-hour jog back to the cabin, where Aunt Ivy might have something to help with the spider bite, at least until a doctor could arrive. But she sat there. This was both simpler and harder. Simple to do nothing, but hard to resist the urge to help someone in need, even if it was her abuser. Over time, Preston's arms swelled, and his abs contracted, which made his uncomfortable position worse. "You're a sick bitch," Preston managed through labored breathing. He looked like he was about to vomit. "You raped your cousin," Danae countered dryly. "You liked it," Preston said. She didn't know if he said it to hurt her or reassure himself. Danae stood without a word and walked towards him. He apologized and begged her to stop, but she brought her foot down on his wounded thigh as hard as she could. Screams of agony followed. The floor creaked and groaned beneath him, but surprisingly didn't cave. Danae had to wait for him to be quiet enough to hear her. "You liked it," she smirked. "I'll kill you." He used the last of his strength to shakily pick himself out of the floor, stand, and tried to rush her. The poison and blood loss made him pitifully slow, and she simply kicked his thigh when he came close enough. He collapsed forward onto his face, crying in pain. "There's something wrong with you," Preston managed to breathe. "I'll bet, his voice muffled against the floor. "You'll bet what?" Danae asked, leaning forward to hear better. "You killed your dad." Danae was caught off guard by the accusation, and not because it was entirely untrue. She didn't want to tell him pieces of herself she wanted to protect, even though it didn't matter anymore. But it wasn't like she couldn't confess. He was a goner. "No," Danae finally said. She swallowed down a lump in her throat and stood up straight to look down on him. "I just didn't get help." Danae didn't know if he heard her. It was quiet now. Birds sang, the cabin creaked, and leaves rustled in the wind. the Black Widow reappeared and crawled onto his motionless leg. "Artery," she muttered to herself without feeling. She finally remembered the elusive word. As he bled out, she felt a twinge of déjà vu. The spider, a glistening black bead against the coarse fabric of Preston's pants, traced a slow path toward the wound. Danae watched it, her mind detached from the scene of final brutal suffering. The quiet was profound. The vacuum had sucked the sound out of the forest, leaving only the thin, frantic pulse of her own life. Preston was still, an inert mass of muscle and bone finally defeated by the combination of spider venom, blood loss, and Danae's precise, cold fury. The déjà vu was less a feeling and more a precise memory. It wasn't the pain or the confrontation or the betrayal. It was the stillness, that total, utter cessation of movement and sound that followed a great, violent exertion. She turned and began to walk away, the floorboards complaining less beneath her light steps than they had beneath Preston's dying struggle. She reached the door, her hand resting on the smooth, cold metal of the knob. "You said you didn't kill him, Danae!" The voice was not Preston's. It was clear, calm, and came from the shadowy corner of the cabin near the hearth. Danae froze, every muscle turning instantly to quartz. She didn't turn around. Her breathing hitched, but she forced it steady. She recognized that voice. "I didn't," she repeated, her back still to the speaker. Her heart was no longer racing. It had entered a state of unnerving slow-motion beat. "I told him I didn't. I just didn't get help." "You were the help," the voice corrected gently. A figure emerged from the shadows, moving with a liquid grace that suggested zero effort and immense power. It was an older woman, perhaps in her 60s, with Danae's own striking blue eyes and a network of fine silver scars tracing the lines of her face. She wore a simple dress and carried nothing but a sense of absolute authority. It was Grandmother Ilara, the matriarch of the family, a woman Danae hadn't seen in over a decade, the decade since her father died. "He deserved to die for what he did to your mother," Ilara continued, stepping over Preston's cooling body without even glancing down, as one might step over a misplaced piece of furniture. "But you are right. You didn't kill him. He had his own poison in his bloodstream, didn't he? A slow rot that was doing the job perfectly well. All you did was watch him, and you did it from the closet." Danae finally turned, her face expressionless. "How do you know that?" "The spider," Ilara said, gesturing vaguely at the Black Widow still tracing circles on Preston's leg. "The widow's bite is a nasty thing, painful but rarely fatal in an otherwise healthy man. It was the venom I gave you 10 years ago that was already in his system. It just needed a final traumatic circulatory rush to reach the heart in time. The Black Widow's neurotoxin just sped up the process, making it seem like a painful accident, or perhaps a final cold act of revenge from a little girl who found her father on the floor." Danae stared at her grandmother, the full, sickening weight of her entire life of suppressed guilt and self-loathing collapsing into a single terrifying truth. Her father's death, the event that had scarred her, that had convinced her she was a monster, was not her inaction, but her grandmother's action, a terrifying puppet show she had unknowingly been a part of. The déjà vu was because she had been present for a murder before.
"You sent me here," Danae whispered, the realization striking her like a physical blow. "You knew I'd track him down. You knew what I would do to him." "Of course, dear," Ilara replied, her face softening into a smile that was somehow colder than her previous impassivity. "I taught you how to hunt, how to be patient, and how to hate. And I knew what he was. Every family has its weeds. But you, Danae, are the trowel. You are the cleanup. We don't get help for things like this. We handle them. You didn't just not get help for your father, you were being trained to be the solution for the next problem. You are a member of the Council of the Spiders, and this was your final exam. Ilara extended a hand, palm up, toward her stunned granddaughter. You passed. Now let's go home. The family has another weed in the next county that requires attention. Danae looked at the hand, then at Preston's dead body, then at the Black Widow, her family's totem, she now realized. The choice wasn't between escaping and staying. It was between remaining a victim or fully embracing the dark, inherited power she never knew she possessed. The choice was horrifying, but in a strange, twisted way, it made a terrible kind of sense. She took her grandmother's hand. Her life of guilt was over, replaced by a lifetime of calculated, sanctioned violence.